He thought he had a suspect in cuffs. He didn't know he was manhandling the very man who signs his search warrants. Picture this: a quiet Sunday evening in an upscale neighborhood. A man sits on his own porch, sipping tea, enjoying the fruits of a 40-year career in federal law. Then, a patrol car screeches to a halt. An arrogant officer steps out, hand on his holster, eyes full of prejudice, seeing not a judge, but a target. What happens next is a masterclass in patience, a shocking display of abuse, and the most satisfying, career-ending karma you will ever hear. You think you know how this ends? You have no idea. Stay tuned, because Officer Kyler Brock is about to learn that justice is blind, but it isn't deaf. The heat of the Georgia afternoon had finally broken, leaving behind a honey-colored twilight that draped over the manicured lawns of Oak Creek Estates. It was the kind of silence that cost money. The neighborhood was a sprawling labyrinth of colonial revivals and modern farmhouses, set far back from the road behind weeping willows and rigid oak trees. For Elias Brown, this silence was not just a luxury, it was a necessity. At 55 years old, Elias carried the weight of the federal bench on his shoulders. As a federal magistrate judge for the Northern District, his days were consumed by bond hearings, warrant applications, and the grim, endless parade of human error that flowed through the courthouse. He dealt with cartels, white-collar fraudsters, and interstate traffickers. His mind was a steel trap of case law and constitutional precedents, honed by decades of grinding work, first as a fiercely intelligent public defender, then as a relentless prosecutor, and finally, as the man with the gavel. But here, on his wraparound porch, he wasn't Your Honor. He was just Elias. He was dressed in his Sunday worst, as his wife, Olive, liked to call it. A faded, oversized grey hoodie from his undergraduate days at Howard University, and a pair of loose basketball shorts. He was barefoot, his toes resting on the cool painted wood of the decking. In his hand was a glass of iced tea, the condensation dripping onto his knuckles. He took a sip, closing his eyes. The only sound was the rhythmic thwop-thwop of a sprinkler 3 houses down, and the distant hum of a lawn-mower. He loved this house. He had bought it 3 years ago, the culmination of a lifetime of breaking ceilings. He was one of only 3 black families in Oak Creek, a statistic that didn't bother him, though it certainly seemed to bother the neighborhood watch app from time to time. He picked up his tablet, scrolling through a draft opinion he needed to file by Tuesday. He adjusted his reading glasses, lost in the nuances of Fourth Amendment search and seizure laws. The irony of what was about to happen would not be lost on him later. But in that moment, the law was just words on a screen. Abstract, logical, and safe. A blue jay landed on the railing, chirping loudly. Elias smiled without looking up. "I hear you, little man. Court is adjourned." He didn't notice the black and white SUV creeping down the street. It was moving slower than the posted 15 miles per hour, prowling like a shark in shallow water. It wasn't a neighborhood security vehicle. It was a city police cruiser, slightly out of its usual jurisdiction, but technically within the bounds of the county mutual aid agreement. The cruiser slowed as it passed the Miller residence. It slowed again at the corner. Then it came to a complete, silent stop directly in front of Elias's driveway. Elias turned a page on his tablet, oblivious. He reached for his tea, missing the coaster slightly and correcting. The car door opened. A heavy boot hit the pavement. Officer Kyler Brock adjusted his belt. Brock was 27, with a haircut that was high and tight, and a demeanor that was wound tighter. He had transferred to the department 6 months ago from a rural county 2 hours north, bringing with him a thick personnel file that had been conveniently overlooked during the hiring shortage. He was the type of officer who viewed the community not as people to protect, but as terrain to be occupied. To Brock, everyone was guilty of something. It was just a matter of finding the statute. Brock scanned the house. A pristine lawn, a BMW 7 Series in the driveway, and a black man in a hoodie sitting on the porch, staring at a tablet. In Brock's mind, the equation didn't balance. The hoodie didn't match the BMW. The man didn't match the zip code. The narrative in Brock's head, fed by years of unchecked bias and an echo chamber of cynicism, wrote the script instantly. Lookout. Burglar. Squatter. Elias finally looked up as the car door slammed shut. He squinted through his glasses, seeing the uniformed officer walking up his long driveway. He didn't feel fear. He was a federal judge, after all. He felt a mild annoyance. He assumed the officer was soliciting for the police benevolent fund, or perhaps notifying neighbors about a lost dog. Elias set his tablet down on the wicker table. He remained seated, his posture relaxed. He didn't stand up. He didn't wave. He waited. Brock walked with his thumbs hooked near his belt buckle, his chest puffed out. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, about 10 feet from where Elias sat. The elevation difference meant Elias was looking down at him, a dynamic Brock clearly despised. "Help you, officer?" Elias asked. His voice was a deep baritone, the kind of voice that commanded a courtroom without shouting. Brock didn't answer immediately. He chewed gum aggressively, scanning the windows of the house as if expecting accomplices to jump out. Finally, his eyes locked onto Elias. "You live here?" Brock asked. "No. Good evening." "No, sir." Just the accusation disguised as a question. Elias sighed, the annoyance ticking up a notch. He knew this dance. He had seen it in 1,000 case files. He had defended young men who were stopped for less. But he was tired. It was Sunday. "I do," Elias said simply. He picked up his tea again. "Can I help you with something specific?" Brock's eyes narrowed. The lack of deference was triggering him. He was used to fear. He was used to, "Yes, sir, sorry, sir." He wasn't used to a man in gym shorts looking at him like he was a minor inconvenience. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Brock lied. There were no reports. The dispatch log was empty. Break-ins, porch pirates. "Is that right?" Elias took a sip of tea. "I haven't seen anything, but I appreciate the patrol. You can carry on." It was a dismissal, a polite, verbal door slam. Brock didn't move. He took one step up the stairs. The wood creaked. "I'm going to need to see some ID," Brock said, his hand drifting closer to his radio. Elias lowered his glass. The air on the porch suddenly felt very heavy. The birds seemed to stop singing. "Officer," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of the magistrate. "I am sitting on my own private property. I am not operating a vehicle. I am not suspected of a crime. I am under no legal obligation to identify myself to you." Brock's face flushed a deep, angry red. He took another step up. He was now on the porch proper. "I'm conducting an investigation," Brock snapped, "and you fit the description of a suspect we're looking for." "Which suspect?" Elias challenged, his eyes hard behind his spectacles. "What description?" "Be specific, officer. Height, weight, clothing, or is the description just black man in Oak Creek?" "Don't get smart with me," Brock pointed a finger. "Stand up, hands where I can see them." "My hands are right here," Elias said, gesturing with the tea glass. "And I am not standing up. You are trespassing. Unless you have a warrant or probable cause that a crime is being committed right now, I suggest you turn around and walk back to your vehicle." It was the tipping point. For Officer Kyler Brock, this wasn't about the law anymore. It was about dominance. It was about a man he viewed as lesser, daring to quote the rules. Brock unclipped the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw the gun, but the threat was explicit. He reached for his radio with his other hand. "Dispatch, show me out at 4402 Oak Creek. I've got an uncooperative subject. Possible 1080. Elias shook his head, a look of profound pity crossing his face. "You are making a mistake," he said softly. "A very expensive, life-altering mistake." "Stand up!" Brock screamed, his hand moving to his taser. "Last warning!" The shout echoed off the stately brick facades of the neighboring houses. Across the street, Mrs. Higgins, a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for gardening and nosiness, paused while deadheading her roses. She peered over her hedge, her eyes widening, as she saw the uniformed officer screaming at the nice man who always waved when he got the mail. She fumbled for her phone, not to record, but to call the police on the police, confused by the tableau. On the porch, the dynamic had shifted from tense to volatile. Elias Brown remained seated. He knew the case law regarding contempt of cop. He knew that any sudden movement, even to stand up, could be interpreted as furrowing of the brow or a bladed stance in a qualified immunity hearing. He had written opinions granting summary judgment to officers in difficult situations, and he had denied them in cases of clear abuse. He knew exactly where the line was. Officer Brock had just sprinted across it. "I am telling you for the last time," Elias said, articulating every syllable with judicial precision. "I am Magistrate Judge Elias Brown. I reside at this address. You have no probable cause to detain me." The words, Magistrate Judge, bounced off Brock's consciousness like pebbles off a tank. He didn't hear a title. He heard a lie. In Brock's limited worldview, federal judges didn't wear hoodies. They didn't sit on porches in basketball shorts. They were old white men in oak-paneled rooms. This man was lying, and lying was resistance. "I don't care who you say you are," Brock yelled, stepping forward and kicking the wicker table. The table skidded, and the glass of iced tea toppled, shattering on the deck. Amber liquid pooled around Elias's bare feet. "That's destruction of property," Elias noted calmly, though his heart rate was beginning to climb. He was disciplined, but he was human. The adrenaline was dumping into his system. "You're under arrest," Brock lunged. He grabbed Elias by the wrist, yanking him upward. Elias was a big man, broad-shouldered and heavy, not easily moved. He didn't fight back, but he didn't help. He went limp, a tactic of passive resistance. "Stop resisting!" Brock screamed, the mantra of the aggressor, ensuring the body cam audio favored him. He twisted Elias's arm behind his back with excessive force, leveraging the shoulder joint painfully. Elias grunted, pain shooting up his rotator cuff. "I am not resisting," he gritted out. "I am complying with your unlawful assault to prevent you from shooting me." "Shut up!" Brock shoved Elias face first against the siding of his own house. The rough brick scratched Elias's cheek. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked onto Elias's left wrist. Brock wrenched the arm up high, forcing Elias to bend forward, then grabbed the right hand. Click, click, click. The ratchets tightened until they bit into the skin. "You're tight," Elias said. "Loosen them." "Comfort isn't a priority for criminals," Brock spat, breathing heavily. He was pumped full of adrenaline, high on the capture. He had the suspect secured. He felt powerful. He dragged Elias to the edge of the porch steps. "Sit down." "I was sitting down before you attacked me," Elias replied dryly. He sat awkwardly on the top step, his hands pinned behind him, the metal digging into his spine. By now, the neighborhood was waking up. Mrs. Higgins had been joined by Mr. Henderson from next door, a corporate tax attorney who knew Elias professionally. Henderson was jogging across his lawn, phone in hand, recording. "Hey!" Henderson shouted from the sidewalk. "Officer, what are you doing? That's Judge Brown!" Brock whipped his head around. "Back up! Step back, or you're next for obstruction." "You're arresting a federal magistrate on his own porch," Henderson yelled, holding his phone steady. "I'm live streaming this, you idiot. You have no idea what you've done." Brock hesitated. The word judge, coming from a white man in a polo shirt, hit different than it did coming from the suspect. Doubt flickered in his eyes for a microsecond, but his ego smothered it. He had already committed. To back down now would be to admit weakness. He doubled down. "He refused to identify. He resisted arrest," Brock shouted back. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, I have one in custody. I need a supervisor on scene. Hostile crowd forming." "Hostile crowd?" Elias chuckled darkly from the step. "It's two neighbors, officer, and they are witnesses." Elias shifted his weight. The pain in his shoulder was throbbing. "Officer, I have a medical condition. My circulation is being cut off. You are required to check the fit of the cuffs." "You'll survive," Brock sneered, leaning against the porch railing, trying to look casual while his heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the eyes of the neighbors. He saw more phones coming out. Inside the house, Sarah Brown had been napping. The shouting woke her. She came to the front door, opening it just as Brock was leaning back. She saw her husband, the man she had loved for 30 years, handcuffed like a common criminal on their porch steps, bleeding slightly from a scratch on his face. She didn't scream. Sarah was a former emergency room nurse. She went cold. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Stay inside, Olive," Elias said quickly. "Call Chief O'Malley. Use the personal number. Tell him his boys are lost." Brock turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, step back inside. This is a crime scene." "This is my house," Sarah snapped, her eyes blazing. "And that is my husband. What is he charged with? Being black on a Sunday?" "He's detained for investigation of burglary and resisting arrest," Brock said, reciting the script. "Burglary?" Sarah let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "He's wearing his college hoodie. The keys to that car are in his pocket. You absolute fool." She slammed the door, not to retreat, but to get to the phone. Brock shifted uneasily. The narrative was crumbling. The burglar had a wife inside the house. The hostile crowd was shouting legal statutes at him, and the man in cuffs was sitting there with a look of terrifying calm. Elias looked up at Brock. "You know," he said conversationally, "I signed a warrant for a Title III wiretap this morning. I spoke with the U.S. Attorney about police misconduct protocols last week, and right now I'm thinking about 42 U.S. Code, Section 1983. Do you know what that is, Officer Brock?" Brock didn't answer. He stared at the driveway, praying for backup. "It's the statute that allows me to sue you personally," Elias continued. "Not just the department. You, your pension, your house, that truck I saw you pull up in. It's going to be mine." "Shut up!" Brock yelled, his voice cracking. Then the sirens started. Not one, not two, but a symphony of them. First, the local precinct backup. 2 more cruisers screeched around the corner, lights flashing. Then a black SUV with tinted windows. Then another unmarked sedan. Brock exhaled, thinking the cavalry had arrived to save him. He watched as 2 officers from his shift, Miller and Davids, jumped out of the first cruiser. They ran up the driveway, hands on their holsters. "Brock, you good?" Miller shouted. "Yeah. Suspect is non-compliant. Crowd is—" Miller skidded to a halt. He looked at the man sitting on the steps. He looked at the house. He looked at the BMW. He looked at Elias's face. Miller's face drained of color. He had been in Elias's courtroom 3 weeks ago for a suppression hearing. He had been grilled by Elias on proper chain of custody. Oh no, Miller whispered. He looked at Brock with wide, horrified eyes. Brock, take them off. What? Brock blinked. Take them off right now, Miller hissed, lunging forward. That's Judge Brown, you moron. He wouldn't ID, Brock stammered, his world tilting on its axis. Before Miller could reach the keys, the black SUV slammed into the curb, hopping the grass slightly. The door flew open. Chief of Police Marcus O'Malley stepped out. He wasn't in uniform. He was in golf attire, his face purple with exertion and rage. He didn't walk. He stormed. Behind him, the unmarked sedan stopped. 2 men in suits got out. FBI. They had been working a case with Elias and were nearby when Sarah called. Brock froze. He saw his chief sprinting up the lawn. He saw the suits. He looked down at Elias. Elias looked up, a small, wintry smile playing on his lips. "Hello, Marcus," Elias said, calmly to the chief of police. "Your officer here seems to think I'm a burglar." Chief O'Malley didn't look at Elias. He looked at Brock, and the look he gave him was enough to wither a soul. "Officer Brock," O'Malley said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. "If you do not have those cuffs off in the next 3 seconds, I will personally throw you through that window." The silence that followed Chief O'Malley's threat was heavier than the humid Georgia air. It was a suffocating, dense silence that seemed to press down on Officer Kyler Brock's chest. Brock's hands shook. The adrenaline that had fueled his aggression moments ago had curdled into a cold, sickly dread. He fumbled for the handcuff key on his belt, his fingers slipping on the metal. He couldn't find the slot. "Give me that!" Officer Miller snarled, snatching the keys from Brock's trembling hand. Miller didn't look at Brock. He couldn't. The second-hand embarrassment and the sheer terror of the situation made him want to vanish. Miller moved behind Elias, his movements gentle, almost apologetic. Click. The ratchet released. Elias Brown didn't rub his wrists immediately. He didn't gasp. He stood up slowly, unfolding his frame with a dignity that made the police uniform look like a clown suit. He brought his hands in front of him, inspecting the deep red indentations where the metal had bitten into his skin. There was a small trickle of blood on his left wrist where the skin had broken. "Judge Brown," Chief O'Malley said, his voice tight, stepping onto the porch. He looked like a man watching his career burn down in real time. I don't have words. Are you all right?" Elias looked at the chief. They had played golf together at the charity fundraiser 2 months prior. They had discussed sentencing guidelines over scotch. Now, O'Malley was looking at him like he was a bomb that had already detonated. "I'm injured, Marcus," Elias said, his voice flat. "I have nerve damage in my right hand. I can feel the tingling. That's going to make signing your search warrants difficult next week." O'Malley winced. "We'll get paramedics. Immediately. Miller, call EMS." "No." Elias raised a hand. "Not yet." Elias turned his gaze to Brock. The young officer had backed down the steps and was standing on the grass, looking small. But even now, the arrogance lingered. Brock was whispering to his partner, pointing at Elias, mouthing the words, "He wouldn't ID." "Officer Brock," Elias called out. Brock looked up, startled. "Yeah?" "Not yeah," Special Agent David Ross of the FBI barked, stepping out of the unmarked sedan. He walked up the driveway, his badge hanging from his neck. "You address him as Your Honor or Judge Brown. Do you understand me?" Brock swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Come here," Elias said. Brock hesitated. He looked at his chief. O'Malley nodded, a sharp, angry jerk of the head. Brock walked back up the steps, standing 2 feet from the man he had just assaulted. "Do you know why I didn't identify myself?" Elias asked quietly. Brock's jaw tightened. Policy says. The law, Elias interrupted, says that a citizen on his own property, suspected of no specific articulable crime, has the right to be left alone. I didn't identify myself because I didn't have to, and I wanted to see if you were an officer of the law or a bully with a badge. Elias leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Brock and the chief could hear. You failed the test, son, and now you are going to be the lesson. I was doing my job, Brock muttered, unable to help himself. You fit the profile. The profile? Elias raised an eyebrow. A black man in a house that costs more than you'll make in 10 lifetimes? That profile? That's enough, O'Malley snapped. He turned to Brock. Turn around. Chief? Brock blinked. Turn around, O'Malley roared. Brock turned. O'Malley reached out and unclipped the radio from Brock's shoulder. Then, with a yank that nearly pulled Brock off balance, he ripped the badge from Brock's shirt. The fabric tore slightly. Gun, O'Malley demanded. Brock's eyes watered. This was the ultimate shame, to be disarmed in the field. Chief, come on, it was a mistake. He resisted. You saw the body cam. I am going to watch every second of that body cam, O'Malley said, taking the Glock 19 from Brock's holster and handing it to Miller. And I pray to God it malfunctions, because if the audio is clear, you are going to prison. Get him out of here, O'Malley ordered Miller. Put him in the back of the squad. He's not driving. He's suspended pending an internal investigation, effective immediately. As Miller led a stunned, pale Brock away, the neighbors, who had gathered in a semicircle on the sidewalk, began to applaud. It wasn't a raucous cheer, but a slow, condemning clap. Mr. Henderson was still filming. Elias watched the cruiser door slam shut on Brock. He didn't feel triumph. He felt exhausted. Sarah stepped out of the house then, carrying a towel and a bag of ice. She walked past the chief of police without looking at him and went straight to her husband. She gently wrapped the ice around his wrists. I'm calling your doctor, she said softly. I'm fine, Sarah. You are not fine, she hissed, tears finally spilling over. He could have killed you, Elias, if you had reached for your phone, if you had stood up too fast. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Every black person in America knew how that sentence ended. O'Malley cleared his throat. Judge, I want to assure you, the department will handle this. We will do a full internal review. We'll handle this in-house. Elias looked up from the ice pack. The in-house comment was exactly what he expected. The blue wall of silence was already trying to erect itself. Marcus, Elias said, his voice hardening. You aren't handling this in-house. This is a federal matter now. Federal? O'Malley paled. Elias, come on. It's a bad stop. It's assault, maybe. But let's not blow this up. He deprived me of my civil rights under color of law, Elias recited. Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 242. That is a federal crime, and since I am a federal magistrate, and he interfered with my ability to perform my duties by injuring my hand, Elias looked at the FBI agents standing by the BMW. Agent Ross nodded grimly. The Bureau is already opening a file, Chief, Ross said. We're taking jurisdiction, and we're taking the body cam footage, now, before it gets corrupted or lost in your server room. O'Malley looked defeated. He knew the game was over before it started. Miller, O'Malley shouted. Give the agents the SD card from Brock's camera. Do not touch it. Do not pass go. Elias sat back down on his wicker chair. The sun had fully set now. The porch light flickered on. I'm going to the hospital, Elias announced. I need every bruise, every scratch, and every nerve impulse documented. And then, Marcus, then I'm calling the press. The video hit the internet at 7 a.m. the next morning. Mr. Henderson hadn't just recorded it. He had uploaded it to Twitter with the hashtag #JudgeInCuffs. By the time Elias woke up, after a fitful sleep aided by heavy painkillers, the video had 4 million views. The clip was damning. It showed the calm, seated judge and the escalating manic aggression of Officer Brock. It showed the kick to the table. It showed the violent wrenching of the arm. And, most crucially, it captured the audio perfectly. "I don't care who you say you are." Elias watched it on his iPad in the kitchen. His right hand was in a soft cast. The doctor had confirmed a severe sprain and potential nerve impingement in the ulnar nerve. "It's everywhere, Elias," Sarah said, pouring him coffee. She looked tired. Her phone had been ringing since 5 a.m. "CNN, Fox, MSNBC. They're all camped at the end of the subdivision. The HOA is furious." "Let them be furious," Elias muttered. "I pay my dues." His phone buzzed. It was Michael Russo, the rep for the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP. Russo was a legendary fixer, a man who had saved the careers of cops who had done far worse than Brock. He was known as the Teflon Don of police unions. Elias let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, the news cut to a live press conference at the police station. Chief O'Malley stood at the podium, looking like he hadn't slept. But standing next to him, surprisingly, was not Brock, but Michael Russo. "Good morning," O'Malley began. "We are aware of the incident involving Officer Brock and Judge Brown. We take these allegations seriously." Russo stepped in, practically elbowing the chief aside. Russo was a short, stocky man with a thick neck and a thicker accent. "Let's be clear," Russo boomed into the microphones. "The video you are seeing is a snippet. It lacks context. Officer Brock was responding to a call for service in a high-crime area." "Oak Creek is a high-crime area?" a reporter shouted. Russo ignored the question. Officer Brock followed protocol. The suspect, Russo paused, catching himself. The individual refused a lawful order to identify. When an officer fears for his safety, he detains. That is the law. We stand by Officer Brock. He is a decorated veteran who deserves due process, not a trial by Twitter. Elias turned off the iPad. "Decorated veteran," he scoffed. "He's been on the force 6 months. "They're going to smear you," Sarah said, sitting down opposite him. "You know that, right? They're going to dig up every acquittal you ever signed. They're going to find that speeding ticket from 1998. They're going to say you hate cops." "I don't hate cops," Elias said, standing up. "I hate bad ones, and Russo just made a tactical error." "What error?" "He doubled down," Elias said, a glint of the prosecutor returning to his eyes. "If they had apologized, if they had thrown Brock to the wolves immediately, I might have settled for a civil suit and his resignation. But now they're claiming what he did was policy." Elias walked to the window. "If it's policy to assault a sitting federal judge on his porch," Elias said, "then the policy is unconstitutional, and that means I can sue the city, the union, and the department for systemic failure. Russo just handed me the keys to the Treasury." Later that afternoon, Kyler Brock sat in his living room, the blinds drawn. His wife, Jessica, was crying in the kitchen. "They're saying you're a racist, Kai," she sobbed. "My mum called. She saw it on Facebook." "I'm not a racist," Brock shouted, throwing a beer can against the wall. It dented the drywall, leaving a wet stain. "I didn't know who he was. If he had just shown me his ID, none of this would have happened." Brock truly believed this. In his mind, he was the victim. He had been set up. The judge had baited him. It was a trap. His phone rang. It was Russo. "Kai, listen to me," Russo said. Stay inside. Don't talk to anyone. We're putting you on paid administrative leave." "Paid?" Brock asked, hopeful. "Yeah. It's a vacation, kid. We're going to spin this. We found some dirt on the judge. He represented a Black Panther member back in the 90s as a public defender. We're going to paint him as an anti-police radical who provoked you. Can you do that?" Brock asked. "Watch me," Russo said. "Just keep your mouth shut. The DA, Gavin Thorne, is up for re-election. He needs the union's endorsement. He won't press charges. I promise you that. You'll be back on patrol in 6 months." Brock hung up, feeling a surge of relief. The system was working. The blue wall was holding. But across town, in the sterile, glass-walled conference room of a high-end law firm, Elias Brown was assembling his own wall. He wasn't representing himself. That was a fool's errand. He had hired Olivia Vance, a shark of a civil rights attorney who had made millions suing police departments in Chicago and New York. She was sharp, vicious, and theatrical. "Russo is playing the bad apple defense in reverse," Olivia said, pacing the room. "He's trying to say the apple is good and the orchard is dangerous. He's going to attack your character." "Let him," Elias said, examining his cast. "I want to file the 1983 suit tomorrow morning, but I want something else." "What?" "I want the internal affairs file on Brock," Elias said. "The one from his previous department, the rural county up north." "We can't get that without a subpoena, and that will take months," Olivia said. "No," Elias smiled. "I have a friend in the clerk's office up there. A favor from a federal trafficking case I presided over. Rumor is, Brock didn't transfer voluntarily. He was allowed to resign to avoid prosecution." Olivia stopped pacing. Her eyes widened. "If that's true, and O'Malley hired him anyway." "Then it's Monell liability," Elias finished the thought. "It proves the department has a custom and practice of hiring dangerous officers and ignoring red flags. It blows the cap off the damages." "And," Olivia added, a wicked grin spreading across her face, "it means Chief O'Malley knew he was handing a loaded gun to a ticking time bomb." Elias nodded. "The union thinks they're fighting a PR battle. They don't realize they're walking into a federal buzzsaw." The intercom buzzed. "Judge Brown, Agent Ross is on line 1. Elias picked up the phone. "Agent Ross." "Judge," Ross's voice was clipped. "We just executed a search warrant on the police department's server room." "And?" "The body cam footage from the 2 backup officers? The ones who arrived right before the chief?" "Yes." "Deleted," Ross said. "Attempted scrub. 15 minutes ago." Elias closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. They just added obstruction of justice and tampering with evidence to the list, didn't they? "It gets better," Ross said. "The login credentials used to delete the footage? They belong to Chief O'Malley." Elias opened his eyes. The game had just changed. It wasn't just about a racist cop anymore. It was about a conspiracy. "Ross," Elias said, his voice dropping to that terrifyingly calm register. "Go arrest the chief of police." The following Monday morning, the Oak Creek Police Department was operating with a nervous energy. The Judge incident, as it was being whispered in the break room, hung over the precinct like a toxic cloud. Chief O'Malley sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. He had spent the weekend making calls, to the mayor, to Union Rep Michael Russo, even to a friend in the district attorney's office. He had been assured that the glitch in the server logs would hold up. He had been told that the FBI was bluffing, that they wouldn't raid a local police station over a misunderstanding involving a magistrate. He was wrong. At 9:15 a.m., the front double doors of the precinct burst open. It wasn't a subtle entry. 12 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI fanned out across the lobby. They didn't stop at the reception desk. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military unit. Agent David Ross led the charge, holding a folded piece of paper that O'Malley recognized instantly. A federal search and seizure warrant. "Nobody moves! Hands off keyboards! Step away from your desks!" Ross bellowed, his voice echoing off the tile floors. The station froze. Dispatchers stopped typing. Patrol officers mid-coffee raised their hands. O'Malley stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He opened his office door just as Ross kicked the outer gate open. "Agent Ross!" O'Malley tried to muster his command voice, but it cracked. "This is highly irregular. You can't just barge in here." "Chief Patrick O'Malley," Ross said, ignoring the protest entirely. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, tampering with federal evidence, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights." The silence in the station was absolute. Every officer watched as their chief, the man who signed their paychecks, the man who held the keys to their promotions, was spun around and handcuffed. "You're making a mistake," O'Malley hissed, his face flushing a deep crimson. "I have friends in D.C. "You're going to need them," Ross replied, tightening the cuffs. "We recovered the deleted footage, Patrick. Your IT guy rolled on you 10 minutes ago. We have the keystroke logs. We know you used your admin password to wipe the backup officer's body cams." O'Malley's knees buckled. The IT guy, a nervous civilian employee named Gary, was the weak link he hadn't accounted for. "Get him out of here," Ross ordered. 2 agents marched the chief past his own subordinates. The shame was palpable. Officers looked down, refusing to meet his eyes. The blue wall wasn't just cracking, it was being demolished with a sledgehammer. Meanwhile, Kyler Brock was sitting on his couch, watching The Price is Right, nursing a hangover. He was still under the impression that this was a temporary storm. Russo had promised him the union lawyers would stall the investigation until the news cycle moved on to the next tragedy. Then, his phone exploded with notifications. Chief O'Malley arrested by FBI, federal raid at Oak Creek PD. DOJ opens pattern or practice investigation. Brock dropped the remote. His stomach churned. If the chief was down, who was protecting him? He dialed Russo. It went to voicemail. He dialed his sergeant. Voicemail. He dialed Miller, his partner. "Don't call me, Brock," Miller answered, his voice hushed and panicked. "Miller, what's happening? They took the chief." "They took everyone's hard drives, man," Miller whispered. "The feds are tearing the place apart. They're looking for your file, Brock, the real one." "My file?" Brock felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. "What file?" "The one from Barricade County," Miller said. "The one O'Malley hid in his safe. Rumor is, you didn't just resign from your last job. Rumor is you beat a kid half to death, and O'Malley buried it as a favor to your uncle in the state senate." The line went dead. Brock stared at the phone. It wasn't just a rumor. It was the truth. 3 years ago, he had fractured a teenager's orbital socket during a traffic stop. The county had settled for $500,000 with a strict non-disclosure agreement, and Brock had been allowed to resign quietly. O'Malley had hired him, knowing all of it, bypassing the background check, because Brock's uncle, a powerful state senator, had promised O'Malley funding for new tactical gear. It was a quid pro quo. And now, the FBI had the safe. That evening, Elias Brown sat in his library, his hand still wrapped in a brace. Olivia, his attorney, sat opposite him, a stack of documents on the mahogany desk. "They found it," Olivia said, a predatory smile on her lips. "The ghost file. O'Malley kept a physical copy in his personal safe, probably as leverage against you-know-who." "Senator Brock," Elias nodded. "I know him. He voted against my confirmation to the bench. Karma is a circle, Olivia noted. The FBI is charging O'Malley and the senator with conspiracy, but that leaves Kyler Brock exposed. The union is cutting him loose, Elias. Russo released a statement an hour ago saying the FOP does not condone the actions of officers who conceal prior misconduct. They're throwing him off the boat to save the ship, Elias said, sipping his tea. This time, safely indoors. So, he has no qualified immunity defense. None, Olivia said. Qualified immunity protects officers who make reasonable mistakes in unclear situations. It does not protect officers who lie on their employment applications or chiefs who cover up violent pasts. The judge assigned to the civil suit, Judge Harrison, already signaled he's going to strip Brock's immunity. Elias leaned back. So, we proceed to deposition. We do, Olivia said, and I'm going to tear him apart. The deposition took place 2 weeks later in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Atlanta. It was a sterile, cold environment designed to make people uncomfortable. Kyler Brock sat at the long table, wearing a suit that didn't fit him. He looked smaller without his uniform, without his badge, and without his gun. Beside him sat a court-appointed civil defense attorney, a weary man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to the neighbor, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Opposite them sat Olivia. She didn't have a stack of messy papers. She had a single, slim binder and a tablet. Elias Brown sat in the corner, silent. He wasn't required to be there, but he chose to be. He wanted Brock to see him, not as a victim, but as the architect of his downfall. The videographer adjusted the camera. We are on the record. Case number 24-CV-8892. Brown versus Brock et al. Olivia began. Her voice was pleasant, almost friendly, which was the first sign of a trap. Mr. Brock, she started. State your name for the record. Kyler Brock. And you are currently unemployed, is that correct? I'm on unpaid leave, Brock muttered. Correction, Olivia smiled. As of this morning, the city manager has formally terminated your employment due to the indictment of Chief O'Malley and the discovery of your falsified application. Did you not receive the email? Brock blanched. He looked at his lawyer. Henderson shrugged. News to me. Brock's hands clenched into fists on the table. He had been fired. It was real. Let's talk about Sunday the 14th, Olivia continued. You stated in your report, which we have proved was filed after you knew Judge Brown's identity, that you feared for your safety. Why? He was reaching, Brock stammered. He had a glass. It could have been a weapon. A glass of iced tea, Olivia clarified. You felt threatened by a beverage. He was aggressive. He wouldn't identify himself. Is failure to identify a crime in this state, Mr. Brock, if there is no reasonable suspicion of a crime? I thought there was a crime. What crime? Olivia leaned in. Be specific. What exact crime was Elias Brown committing sitting on his porch? He looked like a suspect. Which suspect? Olivia swiped her tablet. A screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the police dispatch logs for that day. There were no burglary calls in Oak Creek for 3 weeks prior to this event. No BOLO alerts. No suspect descriptions. So when you say he looked like a suspect, what did you mean? Brock stayed silent. He knew the trap. If he said burglar, he was lying. If he said nothing, he looked incompetent. Did you mean he looked black, Mr. Brock? Olivia asked softly. No, I'm not a racist, Brock shouted, standing up halfway. Sit down, his lawyer hissed. Then explain it, Olivia pressed. Explain why you drew your taser on a 55-year-old magistrate judge within 45 seconds of exiting your vehicle. I made a mistake, Brock whispered, defeated. A mistake? Olivia laughed, a cold, sharp sound. No, Mr. Brock, a mistake is a typo. A mistake is forgetting your keys. Breaking a man's wrist and ending your own career because your ego couldn't handle a black man knowing the law better than you. That's not a mistake. That's malice. She flipped a page in her binder. Let's talk about assets, she said, shifting gears instantly. Since Judge Harrison has denied your qualified immunity, you are personally liable for damages. Do you own your home, Mr. Brock? Yes, Brock said, his voice trembling. Mortgage? Mostly paid off. Inheritance. Good, Olivia noted it down. And the 2024 Ford Raptor truck parked outside? Is that yours? Yes. Pension? I have a 401k from my last job. Not anymore, Olivia said, closing the binder. You see, Mr. Brock, we aren't just suing the city for millions. We are suing you for everything you have. By the time we are done, you won't be able to afford the gas to drive that truck to the unemployment office. Brock looked at Elias. For the first time, he saw the man. Not a suspect, not a perp, but a force of nature. Why are you doing this? Brock asked Elias, breaking protocol. You're a judge. You have money. Why take my house? I have a wife. I have a kid on the way. Elias stood up slowly. He walked over to the table. He placed his injured hand, still in the brace, on the polished wood. You asked me why I didn't ID myself, Elias said quietly. I told you. I wanted to see if you were a bully. You were. And bullies don't stop until they are stopped. Elias leaned down, his face inches from Brock's. I'm not taking your house because I need it, son. I'm taking it because you don't deserve the comfort of a home after you violated the sanctity of mine. You entered my sanctuary with violence. I am entering yours with the law. Elias turned to Olivia. I'm done here. Finish him. The fallout was swift and brutal. The civil trial didn't even happen. Brock's insurance company refused to cover him because his actions were deemed willful and malicious, falling outside the scope of his policy. Without a defense fund, Brock was forced to settle. The terms were draconian. 1. Public apology. Brock had to read a prepared statement written by Elias on camera, admitting to racial profiling and excessive force. 2. Asset seizure. The house was sold. The proceeds went to a legal defense fund for victims of police brutality. The truck was seized. 3. The bar. Brock was permanently decertified. He could never work in law enforcement or private security again, not even as a mall cop. 6 months later, the for sale sign was pulled out of the lawn of Brock's modest ranch house. Elias Brown sat in his car across the street, watching. A moving truck was loaded up. Kyler Brock, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, carried a box of clothes to a rusted sedan. His wife was already in the car, refusing to look at him. She was leaving him, moving back to her parents. The financial strain had broken the marriage. Brock looked up and saw the BMW. He saw Elias watching him. There was no anger left in Brock's face, just a hollow, haunting realization that he was the architect of his own hell. Elias didn't smile, he didn't wave, he just put the car in drive and pulled away, heading back to Oak Creek. He had court in the morning. The wheels of federal justice are known to grind slowly, but when they finally catch traction, they pulverize everything in their path. 18 months after the incident on the porch, the landscape of Oak Creek had been fundamentally altered. The Department of Justice had descended upon the town like a storm, tearing through the police department's records with forensic precision. The blue wall that Chief Patrick O'Malley had spent a decade constructing wasn't just breached, it was demolished, brick by corrupt brick. The federal consent decree was the first domino. It mandated independent oversight, body camera audits for every shift, and a complete purge of the department's hiring practices. But the true climax came in the sterile, wood-paneled courtroom of the Federal District Court, Elias's own workplace, though he sat in the gallery this time, a silent observer to the dismantling of a tyrant. Patrick O'Malley, stripped of his uniform and his pride, looked small in his cheap suit. He had pleaded guilty to 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law and 1 count of obstruction of justice. "Mr. O'Malley," Judge Harrison said from the bench, "you treated a public office as a private fiefdom. You are not a protector of the peace. You are a vandal of the Constitution." The sentence was 48 months in a federal correctional institution. No parole. As the marshals clicked the handcuffs onto O'Malley's wrists, Elias simply watched, his face a mask of stone. Justice was being served. But for Elias Brown, true closure didn't come from a courtroom. It came from the quiet, painful work of rebuilding. His right hand had healed, but the nerve damage was permanent, a constant pins and needles sensation in his thumb. It was a daily reminder. Every time he picked up his gavel, he felt the ghost of Kyler Brock's handcuffs. He used that feeling to ensure no officer in his courtroom ever got away with a bad stop again. The civil settlement from the city had been historic, $3.5 million. Elias hadn't kept a dime. He used the entire sum to establish the Brown Legal Defense Initiative, a non-profit dedicated to providing top-tier representation for victims of police misconduct. It was a war chest that ensured no officer like Kyler Brock would ever feel safe hiding behind a badge again. It was a Tuesday evening in November when Elias finally saw the end of the story. Driving home from the clinic, he pulled into a dilapidated stop-and-go for gas. He walked inside for a receipt, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The clerk was stocking cigarettes, his back turned. He wore a faded red vest, his posture slumped and defeated. "Excuse me," Elias said. "Pump 4 didn't give me a receipt." The clerk froze. He turned slowly. It was Kyler Brock. The transformation was shocking. He looked 10 years older. His arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. Brock looked at Elias, then darted his eyes down, unable to meet the judge's gaze. He slid the receipt through the metal slot of the bulletproof glass. "How are you, Kyler?" Elias asked softly. I'm working, sir," Brock whispered. "The bank took the house. My wife left. I'm trying to start over." Elias nodded. He could have gloated, but he didn't. "Life is long, Kyler. You have time to be a different man, but you have to choose to be him every single day." "I'm sorry," Brock said, a single tear tracking through his stubble. "I didn't know." "You didn't know who I was," Elias corrected him. "But you should have known who you were supposed to be." Elias walked out into the cold night. He got into his car and drove away, leaving Brock behind the glass. He was going home to his wife, his porch, and his peace. The court was finally adjourned. And that, everyone, is how the gavel finally drops. Kyler Brock thought his badge gave him the right to be a bully. But he learned the hard way that true power doesn't come from a gun. It comes from the truth. He lost his career, his home, and his family, all because he couldn't check his ego at the door. Meanwhile, Judge Brown turned a moment of trauma into a legacy of justice that will protect his community for decades. This story isn't just about one bad cop. It's about the system that protects them and what happens when someone finally has the resources to fight back. It begs the question, if Elias hadn't been a federal judge, how would this story have ended? We all know the answer, and that is the scariest part. What do you think? Did Brock deserve a second chance, or was his punishment exactly what he earned? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes justice and karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new true crime and justice sagas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always comes out in the end.